Recording. Well, good evening, everyone. Welcome to our first live session. We have quite a turnout tonight, right? We have 40 people right now, and we even have people that it's 1 o'clock their time or midnight their time, and they're here, keeping their eyes open. So we'll keep it really dynamic and lively, even though we're talking about law.
It's pretty exciting stuff.
It's exciting stuff. So most of you know who I am. I'm Melly, and you see me in a lot of the videos. And Marcus Reed is my sidekick tonight, and he also teaches in our 404 class, which is the legal, financial, and accounting. But he comes in at the beginning of 401, and he comes in at the beginning of 402 to touch on the highlights of legal issues, sometimes financial issues too, but legal financial issues that are relevant to the course at hand. So thank you again, Marcus, for coming.
Always a pleasure.
He's a great presence in our program. So without further ado, we'll get started. And I think you'll notice that we don't have another live session for a few more weeks because we were supposed to have this session next week, but we have a lot of different things going on. So we're doing this one early. But normally every other week we have a live session, and on the off weeks I offer help sessions where you can just arrange a personal time to talk to me about your particular business idea or concept, or maybe you have some challenges on the Excel spreadsheets that we get into. And on the off weeks, just contact me and set up a time where we can meet on phone, Skype, Google Hangouts, even this conferencing platform is fine too. So we'll get started with Marcus. Do you want to be the driver?
Sure. I think you have one of the slides is yours to start with some overview stuff here.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
Sure. I've done this before.
So, yes, I think that I'll briefly mention that this is our video live session, but you also realize that we have all the traditional video lectures that you'll see week to week on Canvas. Those are complemented with some templates that we use for business plans, and I partition those out when you need them. So you'll see the first template comes with the assignment 1, which covers, you're describing your concept and your business name. And we'll get into that in much more detail tonight. Issues around the business name. The Excel workbook is provided with this class. There's a different Excel workbook for the second class. We cover the whole cost of the good of the product here in these Excel worksheets, and there are also videos you can watch for those of you who don't have much experience with Excel that show you specifically how to input the data into Excel. They're very good at hand-holding you through Excel. There are different Excel workbooks depending on if you're going to do this in metric. If you're doing beer and cider share the same workbook, but spirits have a separate workbook. So look for the ones that are, only pick a metric one if you're going to do your whole business plan in metric units, like hectoliters. And then, as you've probably seen, there's a lot of readings and websites that come with every week, and there's a quiz every week that just kind of helps you monitor your progress. So now, pass it back to Marcus.
All right. Okay. Any of this stuff?
No, you can skip that.
Okay. Skip
it. We can say that do you want to be interrupted as you go on?
Oh, sure, yeah. Please feel free to pop in with any questions along the way. Just type them up there, and Melly and I will both be keeping an eye on the screen to see when your questions pop up. If it's a question that's going to be something that's covered later in this course or maybe in more depth later on, I'll point that out, but I'll also do my best shot at giving you a good broad brush answer. And just in general, what we're going to be going over tonight is very broad. It's meant as sort of an introduction to legal issues that you should be keeping an eye on as you put your company together and develop your business plan. We're not going to delve too deeply into things. You probably will have some questions or things you're thinking about that do delve more deep into things like trademark protection and funding issues and things like that. And I'm happy to address those questions, but I do want to try to get to everything, so I might address them in a pretty brief fashion tonight. So let's go ahead and get into it. These are the things we're going to be talking about. tonight, legal concepts. The first one is business entity formation. Then we'll talk about ownership agreements that sort of go hand in hand with that formation. We'll generally discuss funding and securities issues, how to capitalize your new company. We'll talk very briefly about tax issues, very briefly because I'm not a tax attorney, so I try to avoid talking about such things. We'll get into some name protection issues, and I know we have a question from somebody already on that. And then we'll discuss some alternative arrangements in the alcoholic beverage production world. So let's first talk about business entity formation. And the first thing you're going to do when you're putting a business together after you have your business plan in place, or maybe concurrently with that, is you're going to start a business entity. That's generally going to be a corporation or an LLC. I would say the great majority of the companies, of the beverage companies that I start up, are LLCs, limited liability companies. And that's just for a very practical reason. They're very flexible business entities. They allow a lot of room to bring in investors under some pretty flexible conditions where, for instance, maybe your investors are putting more money in than you, but you're retaining more ownership than they are. It also is just easier to maintain an LLC as a small, closely held company. The formalities are very loose, in most states at least. You don't have to file a lot of stuff. You don't have to have formal corporate shareholder meetings. They're just easier to run. From a tax perspective, they are a flow-through tax entity, which means at the end of the day, all of your profits and losses are going to be recorded on your individual tax return, not on a corporate tax return, and you're not taxed at the corporate level as you are with a corporation, unless, as we'll discuss briefly later, you are an S corporation. Registration with the state. Every state has a Secretary of State or equivalent office where you can go and register your business entity. This is usually one of the criteria for becoming an LLC or a corporation or whatever entity type you're choosing. It's a pretty simple process usually, and at the end of the day, you end up with what's called articles of incorporation, or it might be called articles or organization or certificate of organization, something like that, that indicates the state is recognizing you as a business entity. Generally, if you go to the Secretary of State's website, they'll have a pretty good instructional process for getting through that. But that's also it's also a service that corporate attorneys perform for their clients. Our name availability is a part of this. Most Secretaries of State are not going to allow you to select a name that's already in use. This sort of goes hand in hand with your trademark clearance that we'll talk about a little bit more later, which is where you're making sure that nobody else out there is using the same name as you, where you might be getting into some kind of issue with trademark registration. And we have our first question here. As a brewery expands, is there benefit to converting from an LLC to a corporation? There sometimes can be. There are a lot of situations where that can be a good idea. One such situation is where maybe you're taking on a different kind of funding for your company. Maybe you have a venture capital firm that's interested in investing in your company. So they're going to probably require that you be a C corporation in order to do that, or an angel investor will often require that you are a C corporation. Also, from a tax perspective, there can be some benefits at some point to becoming a corporation and paying yourself as an employee, because there are just some tax benefits where some of your income is going to be taxed as an employee. The rest of it is going to be taxed as a corporate dividend, which is not going to get hit with the payroll taxes. So you can save, I think, 11 or 12% in taxes that way. One way to accomplish that also is to be an LLC or a corporation and to file as an S corporation. We'll talk about that a little bit later. Sole proprietorship versus corporation. A sole proprietorship is sort of a business entity, but not really. Basically, if you're a sole proprietorship, you are acting as yourself. You're recording with the Secretary of State that you're doing business under a business name, but really you are just doing business as yourself. And that means you're not getting the liability protection of the corporation or the LLC, which is the primary reason why you want one of those corporate entities. And what I mean by liability protection is that if a creditor comes after you for some reason, they're going to sue your corporate entity. And if they try to sue you instead, that lawsuit is most likely going to be dismissed because they've sued the improper party. You've been acting as a business, and your corporate entity should be the person per se that's being sued. That way, your personal assets are protected, and if your corporation is sued for so much money that you lose everything in the corporation, you still are only losing what's within the company. You're not going to lose your home or your car, your personal assets. Filing a corporation or an LLC is not the only way. It's not all you have to do to get that liability protection. The limited liability protection with one of these companies is built through that filing. It's built through having the documentation around the corporation. We'll talk about in a second. Capitalization we'll talk about in a second, and just basically acting in your day-to-day business as like you're a company, not like you're a person. So things like having a bank account in your company's name and not in your own name. Those are the things that are going to build that protection.
And you need liability protection when you're in the alcohol business.
You sure do. It is a high liability, high risk area of business. So I just tell everybody, it's sole proprietorship. You can do it. I don't see any reason for it, because if you're a sole proprietor, if you're a single person acting as a business, just form an LLC, single member LLC. That way you at least have that extra layer of protection around you. And it's a minimal cost to achieve that. Registration in foreign jurisdictions, if you're doing a substantial amount of business in another state, you're going to want to register that business within that state. That doesn't mean that if you start distributing beer over to another state, you have to register in that state. It more means that, if you open up a tap room in that state, or if you have an office there, some kind of sustained presence within the state, you'll probably have to register your company there. And trade name registration was skipped over. That's also in line with this name use issue. You can call your corporate entity whatever you want to call it, Marcus Reed LLC, and then when you start up your brewery, say you want to call it Reed Brewing, you can be Marcus Reed LLC doing business as Reed Brewing. You're going to want to register that Reed Brewing as a trade name. So it's not your corporate name, it's just your trade name. We have another question. Would I be able to start an LLC in Alabama and keep the LLC if I move to another state, Oregon, for example? Sure, yeah. Basically under this country's constitution, we allow commerce among the states. So if you start up a business entity in one state and actually operate that business in another, that's fine. That's why you have a lot of Delaware corporations. Not all corporations are based in Delaware, but they are acting under Delaware law. They've selected Delaware law as their jurisdiction for usually tax reasons and corporate governance reasons. There may be some limitations in some states that say under their alcohol laws that you have to be the business has to be a resident of that state. I'm not aware of any of those, but I'd say it's possible. I do some work in the new recreational marijuana world, and that's definitely a concern there. So I wouldn't be shocked if some states have that sort of restriction as well. Moving on to record keeping, this is just another one of those formalities you want to do to keep up your limited liability. This simply means keeping a book of your corporate documents. When you make corporate decisions, you want to make them formally on paper with all the members or shareholders who are required to make that decision signing off on that decision. That way you have a written record of all these major corporate decisions. You're acting like a company, and if any dispute ever arises among the membership or the shareholders as to whether people agreed on this decision, you have a written record of it. It's a step that's often overlooked by companies, but I consider it an important one. Capitalization simply means make sure your company has enough money to cover its foreseeable liabilities. And that's just a fancy way of saying, make sure you can pay your bills. If you don't put enough money into your company to pay your bills and you get sued, this is one of the elements where a creditor can pierce right through your liability protection and go after your personal assets. So that's an important one. Make sure you're putting enough money into the company. Insurance, just I think it goes without saying that it's important to have proper insurance to cover your liabilities, and we'll go over that in much greater detail in later courses. Okay, talk about ownership agreements. This is another area that I find a lot of clients not putting enough emphasis on. They see it as, okay, yeah, we have to have an operating agreement. Okay, yeah, we need a shareholder agreement. I'd say it's probably the most important document you'll ever enter into as a company if you have multiple shareholders or owners. And that's because it's going to dictate how you make decisions. It's going to say how you get paid out of the company, how your taxes are treated. It's going to have things like what happens when you die, or if you go bankrupt, or if you get divorced. All these things that happen in the lifespan of a company is your instruction book for what's going to happen next and how you handle it. Another big one is deadlock provisions. If you are a 50-50 ownership company, which a lot of these startup breweries are, you need a provision in there that's going to say, what if we just can't make decisions together? What if we have a falling out? We want to go different directions, and we're just deadlocked in our decision making. What happens next? Your operating agreement is going to spell out exactly what happens to allow you to get out of that deadlock. It's not always going to be a pleasant method, but it's a method, which is much better than nothing. Operating agreement is the document that goes along with the LLC. That's it's your instruction book for your LLC. The shareholder agreement is for a corporation, but they have very, very similar provisions in them. They're governed a little bit differently, but they're very similar provisions. A buy-sell agreement sometimes is separate from the operating agreement or shareholder agreement, but often it's just contained within it. And that's those transfer provisions that say, what can I do? How can I sell my shares? What's going to happen to them if I quit my job? All these triggering events where when something happens, you know what happens to that person's ownership. So, for instance, a big one is, if you're in a partnership with somebody, you don't want them to just go out and sell their ownership to somebody that you don't know or that you don't want to be part of the business. So you have what's called right of first refusal. So if they go out and try to sell it to somebody, you have the opportunity to buy it before they get a chance to sell it. These are very flexible provisions. You can design them however you want. There are some default rules under state law, but for the most part, you write the instruction book, and your attorney can help you write that.
And we also have a template. There's an example ownership agreement in the module, so you can look at that.
I didn't know.
It's actually an operating agreement. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
It's very basic, so
Yeah.
It needs to go to an attorney like Marcus for something fancier.
Right. And these things can range quite a bit. I've seen 3-page operating agreements. I mean, technically, you can have an oral operating agreement, just agree to verbally, and you often see 60 or 70-page operating agreements as well. It's just different levels of detail.
Yeah, and a lot of people don't have them, and I was in a brewery where we didn't have them, and I was in a partnership, and when I decided to leave, it caused a huge amount of stress and turmoil trying to figure out how I was going to get cashed out, what the price was going to be, and didn't work out really well for me.
It can have disastrous consequences. I hear that story all the time. I see it happening all the time. I recently had a brewery who they've been around for about a year, 50-50 ownership deal. We went through the whole process of putting together a beautifully drafted operating agreement. And I got a call a couple of weeks ago from one of them saying, hey, you know that operating agreement we did we ever sign it? And I said, I don't know. I told you to. I don't have any record of you signing it, but I assume you did. I don't think we signed it. And kind of wishing we would have, because of course they were kind of in a dispute and probably want to go their separate ways, and they don't have that written document to show them how to do it. So my advice to them was just go ahead and sign it. Both of you just sign it, and then we'll have at least a roadmap. Does the shareholder agreement doesn't apply to LLCs? It's basically terminology you're talking about there. When you're talking about limited liability companies, generally the terminology is the owners of that company are members. It's a membership interest, whereas in a corporation they are stockholders. They have stock in the company. That's often they work kind of the same way because you can have units in an LLC that are very much like stock in an LLC, but in general, that membership interest and shareholder interest is the difference. So shareholder agreement applies to corporations generally. You could have an operating agreement that's called a shareholder agreement. Nobody's going to make a huge fuss out of that. It's just terminology. Do these documents need to be recorded in the public record? The documents I mentioned called articles of organization, articles of incorporation, those are generally going to be filed with the state. Operating agreements and shareholder agreements generally are not. Another agreement that I passed right over, for some reason it's not on my slide, is bylaws, corporate bylaws, which is the rules for your company. It's the rules and standards that your company and its directors and officers have to abide by when you're a corporation. Those are sometimes filed with the state, but again, generally not. They're just internal documents. And in a lot of cases, you don't want them to be filed with the state because it's confidential information for your company. That said, a lot of times when you get into getting bank financing, something like that, you're going to have to disclose that operating agreement to your investors or to your financial institution, or just to get credit. Often they'll want to see that operating agreement. Employment agreement, I put that on there because it's just it's often part of the package, and it's a part that sometimes people forget. If you are active within the company as, say, manager, or maybe you're the brewer or something like that, it's often a good piece of it to have you and everybody else as an employee. That way you're held to the standards of an employee, and if you ever start really screwing up your job, or your partner starts screwing up his job, they can be fired. And when they're fired, that triggers these buyout provisions within your formation documents, and it's another method of allowing people to split apart when things aren't going well. A lot of people don't, if they're owners, don't bother getting into employment agreements, but they can be very helpful in some situations. Let's talk about funding. This is an issue that we're going to get into a lot more in the 404 class, that legal financing and accounting class. Is that what it's called? But I'll gloss over some of it here. Just the various sources of funding. Self-funding is where you're just putting your own money into the business. It's my favorite kind of funding because it's simple. It means you have the capital to put a business together, and you don't have to deal with banks, and you don't have to deal with investors. It's great, but I'd say about 1% of people can actually pull it off because it takes a great deal of equity or a great deal of financing to be able to do that. And these are pretty expensive companies to start. And a lot of people who have that much money sitting around tend to open wineries instead of breweries for some reason, or maybe distilleries.
Things are changing.
Things are changing. Yeah, there's a little bit of the self-funding going on these days. There are a couple of interesting ways to self-fund too that I've seen pop up recently. Well, one way is you can borrow off of your 401k. It's not a great way to do it because you have to pay it back. But there's this kind of alternative method that I've had a couple of clients do, and it's worked really well for them. I consider it very risky, but it's worked really well. It's where they basically take their 401k and they fund their company with their 401k. They start their own 401k, essentially roll their 401k over into that 401k fund that they started, and then have their own 401k fund invest in their company. It's a complicated way of saying that you're using your retirement funds to fund your company. The reason I think it's really risky is you're putting all your eggs in one basket. You're taking your whole retirement savings and putting it into a startup business, and the nature of startup businesses is they're kind of risky. But I've had a few people do it lately, and they believe in their business, and they are willing to take that risk, and they're doing great. It's called, if it's something you're interested in, it's called a ROBS method of funding, which is rollover as a business startup, ROBS. Friends and family is what I would say. There's a lot of small breweries being funded this way. You have friends and family who have been drinking your beer for years. They know it's great, and they're willing to back you on it. So you see a lot of loans and equity buy-ins from friends and family. The warning I'll give you here is that even though they're friends and family, they're still investors, and they need to be treated as investors, which means go through all the steps of protecting yourself from them in advance. And I get into that in much more detail in the later class, but it's essentially you need to make sure that they know what they're getting into, so that if things don't go right, they're not going to come back and claim, hey, I just got bamboozled on this deal. I was told I was going to make tons of money off of this, and I'm not making anything, and I want my money back. That's called a securities fraud claim, and that's not good for anyone. So treat them as investors. I mean, if it's your parents, parents are parents. Hopefully they're not going to sue you, but still be careful. Institutional financing. Again, you see a lot of folks trying to get started up with SBA loans and conventional loans. Good point, Steve. Right. And this is a great way to get started up if you can get it. Institutional financing for a startup is very difficult. Institutional financing for a brewery that's been around for 5 years and has history and a great operating history and some income, banks are getting in line to give these guys money. For startups, it's just tougher. And what I would encourage you to do if you're looking at bank loans, find a banker who can speak your language. There are some bankers now who are really interested in the brewing industry and all the alcoholic beverage industries. They actively market to it. They help people find financing within their banks. Talk to them, see what's important to them and to their SBA officer and to their underwriters to allow you to get those loans. It's going to be things like what I've been hearing is your resume. If you've been a brewer at a commercial facility for 5 years, that's great. If you've been a home brewer for a couple of years, that's going to be a little bit tougher. Maybe you went to one of the schools for what is it? UC Davis that has the school. Maybe you went through one of those brewery programs. Maybe you took the Portland State University Business of Craft Brewing class. Seriously, that kind of stuff looks good to underwriters because they see that you've done your homework. You're serious. You're not just saying, I think I'll start a brewery and see how it goes. That's what they're looking for. They're also going to look for some skin in the game. They're going to want you to bring some money to the table, whether that money comes from you personally or from investors, equity investors. And they're going to want you to personally guarantee everything. So all that stuff I said about liability protection does not apply here. They'll want you to personally guarantee everything. So if you fail, they can come after you for your house and your car and your dog and all that stuff.
Doug's question, how well does the VA back SBA loans for breweries?
It does. I had a client do that last year, and it worked really well. VA, if you're not familiar with that program, VA will back loans on certain businesses. Their threshold for accepting you as a borrower appears to be much lower because they're just trying to help out veterans. And they have pretty friendly terms. So yeah, if you're a veteran, check it out. I think it's well worth looking into. The guys I know who did it had a great experience with that.
Those guys down in Salem?
Yeah. Vagabond.
Oh, Vagabond.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's a bunch of vets.
Yep. And are these local Pacific Northwest banks? Yeah, there are. I'll plug a couple of banks here because some of them have been very helpful to start up breweries. Bank of the Cascades, a guy named Patrick McCarthy. Albina Bank, Karen Keith is the contact there. I've also seen some of the bigger banks starting to get involved. Got a call from a guy at US Bank the other day who wants to start talking to breweries. Banks are starting to realize that breweries are not restaurants. There's not a 95% fail rate with breweries. It's more like 5%. So they are getting more interested in getting behind the industry a little bit better. Have you ever seen the USDA rural development back in brewery and smaller markets? I have not.
But we're working on that for the craft malting.
Oh, yeah.
You know, the project I'm involved with. I think I put it on this week's page on Baker City craft malting project. So that's a perfect fit for the rural development.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's a good example of my next item, State Municipal Economic Development Organizations, USDA, of course, is federal
Good
program.
segue, Steve.
Good segue. There are programs out there for building, developing areas of the city that are underserved. Like in Portland, we have something called Portland Development Commission that has been loaning some companies some money. They've been great. They've been super helpful. They give decent terms. They aren't super demanding in their requirements. And if it's a good fit for the area they're trying to develop, they'll really get behind you. Angel investors, those are more familiar to the tech world. You see them popping into this industry a little bit now, but not as much as I'd like to see, actually. Angel investors often they don't bring a ton of money to the table usually, but they'll bring some money to the table, and they'll also often bring some expertise. They'll kind of actively get behind you and help you to succeed. Venture capital, on the other hand, will get involved with your company in a different way, where they just want to control a lot of aspects of your company, including the management. So you have to be careful of that. A great lesson in that one is, actually, I don't think this was even a venture capital deal, but it's a great lesson for funding altogether. It's an article that's been floating around about a distillery down in Texas who took on some private equity, and very quickly the founder of that distillery lost his company because the private equity guy, the investor, came in, took a majority ownership, took over the board essentially, and forced the founder out. So this distiller who had worked to build up this company was no longer with his company. So find that article to read it. I don't know if we posted that one yet on the class, but it's a good one for everybody to read. Crowdfunding is something that's becoming increasingly popular. You have your websites like Indiegogo and Kickstarter. I've seen varying success with those. Some of them wildly successful, making like 40 grand, and others that work really hard to bring in a couple $1,000s if they're lucky, or maybe they have a failed campaign even. The biggest benefit that people say they get out of crowdfunding campaigns is the marketing. They say it gets a lot of word out at a grassroots sort of level to people who are interested in their business. Equipment leasing is something I'm starting to hear more and more about, which is you find somebody who will either lease you equipment directly, or who will fund equipment and basically put a lien on that equipment, loan you the money for purchasing that equipment. I think it's going to become more and more popular as brewers start to realize that, hey, this 3-barrel system isn't going to last me very long. Maybe I'm going to need a 10-barrel in a couple of years. So instead of going out and buying $30,000 system or $80,000 system, they lease one and switch it out in a couple of years for a larger system. I actually think it's a good way to go if you can get good terms on it. Some of the terms are pretty lousy. So
There's a bunch of questions. Why are angel investors less likely to go for LLCs?
That's a good question. I've looked into that before, and I believe it's a corporate governance issue for the most part, but the answer that I came up with when I researched this was because they do. I think it's a tax and corporate governance issue, but I couldn't tell you exactly. but they just do. I'd say the majority of the time they require you to be a corporation. With crowdfunding, is that considered income, especially if you give them something for their money? You asked me a tax question. How dare you? I believe it is considered income. Don't quote me on that, though. That's another one I've come across it, but I apologize. I can't tell you off the top of my head.
But we can find out for sure.
We can find out, yeah.
We'll ask Maria, our accountant.
Yeah, she'll definitely know. One important thing to point out about crowdfunding is it's, well, I believe it is income. It's not, people are not purchasing equity in your company. They're paying money for, basically for a product is what it amounts to, because you're giving them something in return for them paying you that money. They're not going to get ownership in your company. They're going to get, a pint of beer, or they're going to get a T-shirt, or a fermenter named after them, or something like that. There is a new type of crowdfunding that's available. My firm did a deal on one recently for a brewery. It's usually going to be for larger enterprises. So like if you're looking at doing like a $25 million brewery or something like that, equity crowdfunding might be great. But basically what it is pooling together a lot of rich people to fund a project or fund a company. And I say a lot of rich people because generally, at least as the rules are written now, they have to be accredited investors, which means they have a lot of money. As the rules are being sort of rewritten in the future, that's probably going to be opened up a little bit to where you don't have to be rich in order to do these participate in an equity crowdfunding deal. That's going to end up with things like Kickstarter and Indiegogo, where you're no longer giving a T-shirt away, you're giving a very tiny portion of your company away. And it's pretty exciting. It's kind of scary at the same time, but we'll have to see how that develops.
Programs that back organic breweries specifically.
I don't. No. I back organic breweries by drinking their beer, but I don't. They could be out there though. What would you recommend as a good reference point for finding information on opening a brewery in Panama? I have dual citizenship. What would be? Oh boy. I would probably start with hiring a lawyer who knows international law. I don't know. I've known a couple of people who have gone off to start up breweries in foreign countries, but I haven't been involved with them.
Well, usually the consulate, the Panamanian consulate, will have a business development office.
Oh, there you go.
So I would start there.
That's a very good point.
Contact the Panamanian business development office and see what they offer, because they might give you benefits for something like that.
That's a very good point. Is there a rule of thumb how much equity an angel investor or VC would want to fund a startup, or is this completely case by case? Completely case by case. They will try to value your company in some way and then base the percentage that they're looking for on that value. But of course, as you know, if I asked you right now, what's the value of your startup brewery, you're going to have no idea. It's often very arbitrary. But these guys have sophisticated ways of coming up with what they think a value of a company is. And also it's sometimes just what the market will allow. So if you ever watch that Shark Tank show, it's kind of the same thing. You put your idea out there to a VC firm or an angel investor, and they tell you what they think it's worth. And then you decide whether you can stomach that valuation. Frankly, I haven't seen a lot of angel investing in VC and startups. VC is just starting to get into some of the larger operations. I know Uinta down in Utah just took on some venture capital.
Wasatch, my former brewery.
Oh, did they?
Yeah, they just got completely bought out.
Oh, wow. Yeah, there you go. Yeah, it's starting to happen. And
I did not
expect to see more of that. You should have.
So long ago.
How soon in the business process would you get a lawyer involved? Right now, call me tomorrow. No, seriously, I do suggest getting a lawyer involved very early, even if that means just going out and having a beer with a lawyer. A lot of what I do is I go out and have beers with people and just say, this is what you're going to be looking at in the next year of your life. this is what you want to prepare yourself for. So you're not going into this totally blind. So you're not blindsided by things like, oh, I have to sign a lease and I have to personally guarantee that lease, and when can I start getting my licensing? I do not charge for those beer meetings.
Usually has a free beer meeting.
I do the free beer meeting, and I usually pay the tab at the end. So
It's an investment.
not all lawyers are the same. But yeah, get a lawyer involved early, get a CPA involved early. Surround yourself with professionals and tradespeople who know what they're doing. That will benefit you greatly. Probably a great time to give a plug for my group, the Beverage Industry Networking Group. It's just an example of, we have a group of professionals and tradespeople that focus on the brewing industry. It's just an example of how you can, there are people out there who are catering just to these industries and who can help you get your business started up because they've helped so many other people get their business started up. And I'm going to have to start getting through stuff here. I apologize, but we're about 20 minutes out.
That's for Brewery Industry Networking Group.
Yeah, you look it up at Bing, Oregon. It's just,
And cidery and distillery people also go.
Yeah, that's right. And a lawyer that specializes in breweries, if you can find one, use that. I highly recommend that. There are a lot of us out there, I think. I'm not exactly sure. But
well, we know quite a few on the West Coast. I
Yeah.
have business cards. If you go to the Craft Brewers Convention, you'll meet a lot of those people.
Yeah,
They're all
true.
floating around.
Yep. They're the well-dressed ones, except for me. Okay, so I already went over securities law a little bit, so I'm just going to kind of gloss over this. General securities law, when I say security, that means somebody's buying into your company, somebody who's not a founder or like somebody's actively involved in the company. It's just putting money into your company, either purchasing ownership or loaning you money, anything where they're tying the results or the income from their investment to the success of the company. That is a security. So anytime somebody's giving you money into your company, a lot of people say, oh, they're just loaning me money. It's not a security. No, that loan is a security. You're issuing security by issuing a promissory note. So you just have to pay attention to this stuff because you can get burnt pretty badly. Usually where that happens is something goes wrong in the business or there's a relationship falling out and your investor goes to an attorney and says, what are my remedies here? And the attorney says, well, what did they tell you when you bought in? Well, they didn't tell me anything. They just told me to write a check, and I wrote a check, and they told me I was going to make a bunch of money. Well, I'm not making a bunch of money, and I'm upset about it. That's when you get into a securities lawsuit. You get sued for securities fraud. Your lawyer can be named in that lawsuit, so lawyers are particularly sensitive to these issues. And what securities law issues basically entail is you need to make sure that your investors are well aware of what they're getting into, that they know the risks of entering into this business, that they have been disclosed all the relevant information, such as your corporate documents that we've been talking about, your financials, if you have them, financial pro forma, your business plan, all these things, so that at the end of the day, if you're sitting in court, hopefully not, and somebody's asking, what did you know about this company? You don't want them to say nothing. You want them to say, well, I was issued this disclosure statement. I did have these financials. That's where you're going to be protected if you've given up all that information. So just be transparent and let them know what they're getting into. Also, securities law requires that you not advertise your company in certain ways when you're looking for investors. So don't go onto Facebook and post something that says, I'm looking for investors for my company. Or more specifically, don't go on there and say, anybody got 20 grand for me, I'll give you 1% of my company. That's called a general solicitation. You're putting it out to the world that you're accepting investors, and that's going to open you up to some risks. It happens a lot, and people get away with it, but you can get in big trouble if it doesn't work out. Verifying accredited investor status or sophistication simply means wealthy investors are safer than not wealthy investors. You don't want investors who are looking through the couch cushions for loose change to invest with you, or or withdrawing their 401k funds to invest with you. If somebody says, yeah, I'm going to empty my IRA and give you everything in it, that's not a good investor. You want people who can comfortably lose all the money that they're giving you. Generally, those are going to be called accredited investors, which means they are worth about $1 million or more, or they make, I think it's $250,000 or $300,000 a year, something like that. But there's basically a questionnaire that we issue to investors to determine whether they are accredited. If they're not, you at least have to determine that they are sophisticated enough to know what they're getting into. I once had an investor ask me, what does it mean to be sophisticated? And I said, that probably means you're not sophisticated. So it's you just have to be careful and use a lawyer who can help you through that process. It's a tricky process. Chat a little bit about taxes. Again, I'm not a tax attorney, disclaimer. But a lot of tax issues do arise with these companies, especially since they are, you have excise tax issues to deal with. But just generally, as a company, you have to think about things like employment taxes, payroll taxes, et cetera. So when you form your company, you're going to file what's called an IRS Form SS4. That's what gives you your employer identification number, which is basically your social security number for your company. That's where you're going to pay all of your taxes under when you file your tax return. Except for if you're an LLC, you're still going to be filing your taxes through your own personal tax return, but they're still going to want to know that EIN number, employer identification number. States also have their own sort of business identification number that's often going to be associated with paying state employee taxes. In a lot of states, if you don't have employees, then you don't even probably need a state employer tax number because you don't have employees. You're not paying employee taxes. Non-U.S., I put a question mark beside that because not only am I not a tax attorney, I'm not an international tax attorney. So I wouldn't be able to answer your questions on that, unfortunately. Name protection. This is something that's on everybody's mind these days. We were just talking before this session that NPR did a piece recently about how this proliferation of naming and naming of beers and naming of breweries in this industry has caused this really difficult problem of not being able to come up with new names, or if you come up with a new name, somebody else might have come up with it as well, or somebody's trying to use a name that you already have protected. The best thing you can do for name protection is clear the name. And what that means is perform a search that gives you some confidence that nobody else is using that name. There are a lot of different levels to that search. You can go to the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office website, run a trademark search, see if anybody has registered that name as a trademark. You can go to Google is a great resource. The beverage apps like Untapped, Rate Beer, Beer Advocate, we go to all these sites. When we're clearing a mark, we go to all these sites and check them out. Then there's this whole other level where you pay a third-party search company to search all the states, all these resources, and they'll come back with a booklet of all the hits that they had on your name and anything that could be related to your name. A lot of folks don't do that. I think it's money well spent. Those third-party search organizations might charge $2,000 or $3,000 for that service, but that's $2,000 or $3,000 that you're not going to have to put into rebranding yourself in 3 years when you get a cease and desist from another company. I can't stress enough how important it is to do name clearance and to, once you have cleared your name, to protect that name. The protection part is registering the trademark with the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office. Through that process, you're basically staking your claim on that name for this industry. So if you register your brewery name under the category of beer or breweries, you're going to be protected under that category, but you're not going to be protected from, say, a tech company opening up with the same name. You can also, some folks will also register the name as a clothing company. So maybe you sell a ton of T-shirts with your brand on it. That's just a broader way of protecting your name. But trademark registration, highly recommended. It's well worth the money. When you haven't yet used the name, you can still register it in what's called an intent to use registration. And what that basically means, you're getting a registration that says, all right, USPTO, I haven't used this name in commerce yet. I haven't used it I haven't sold anything under this name yet, but I intend to within the next year or so. And when I do, I'm going to show you that I did, and then you're going to give me my full protection. And that full trademark protection is going to relate back to that date of filing. So if you file an intent to use application today, you don't use that name for a year, but then you prove you used it in commerce, they're going to give you protection that relates back to today. So it's this nice retroactive effect.
There's a whole slew of questions related to this before you get.
Yeah, let's have some questions.
With Eric, what gives AB InBev the right to issue a cease and desist letter to a regional brewery here in Maryland called Wild Goose because AB represents Goose Island? Wild Goose has been around for one form or another since 1989. Does that count for anything?
That's a very good question. I mean, AB owns Goose Island outright at this point, so they are looking out for their interests there, and they're probably trying to, invoke a very broad trademark protection and saying that any brewery name with the word goose in it infringes on their trademark rights. If Wild Goose has been around since before Goose Island, then it could be that Wild Goose actually has some what are called common law trademark rights. That means even if they haven't registered their trademark, they might have protection in the area where they were actually selling and marketing their beer. And if that protection precedes AB InBev's or Goose Island's trademark registration, which gives you that kind of national federal protection, then AB InBev isn't going to be able to enforce their rights against Wild Goose in that little area. That Wild Goose will have preserved its trademark rights in that area. So yeah, maybe I don't know where that's going to end up. I haven't actually heard about that one yet. But
Frank's asking a similar question about two breweries sharing the same name.
Where'd it go?
There's a lot of questions here.
Okay.
Here. They share the same name. How do you avoid this? Who would own the trademark? Who would earn the rights to the name of the court?
So let's see. There are two breweries sharing the same name. How do you avoid this? Well, one way to avoid sharing the same name is to do that trademark clearance. That's a very important part. Plus, there's this sort of race to registration that companies get into, which is, hey, if I get my mark registered before you, then I might have greater protection than you. However, there are some caveats to that. If two breweries are using the same name, both are using it in commerce, and one of them has prior rights to the other because they started using it before the other, and yet the one who doesn't have prior rights goes out and files a trademark, that trademark there may be an objection to that trademark, and they may not actually get their trademark registration because they don't have the rights that are prior to the other company. This is where it gets really, really tricky, and this is where I have a guy in my firm who does trademarks pretty much exclusively, and this is the kind of stuff that he works on all the time, looking at what happens if and this happens, we've seen this happen recently quite a bit. You go to start up your brewery, you have your name picked out, you love your name, you go to trademark it, you run a search, and you find somebody somewhere is using the same name, but they're not using it in commerce yet. They don't have that full protection yet. They haven't registered trademark. They don't have this full. They don't have the protection that they would need to secure it. So maybe our client can go out and file an intent to use trademark and get ahead of them in the game and be able to secure their trademark rights, and the other company might be out of luck. That's why it's so important to get out there early, get that trademark registered, even if you're not using it yet. Secure your place of mind. What's that?
I said, while you're in this class and you come up with a name that looks like it's going to work, then you should do the intent to trademark.
Yes,
They want us to
exactly.
move on instead of being bogged down by questions because they're afraid we won't get through the whole presentation.
Yeah, we're almost there, actually. We're almost there.
So
Let me get through this stuff, and then we'll go back to these questions if we have time, which we probably won't. Domain name registration is just another important piece of the puzzle. Get that domain name registered. It shows use of the name for one thing, but it also just secures your place on the web. Other intellectual property issues, recipes. If you want to protect your recipes, which some folks think of recipes as being public domain, it's out there for the world. Some folks like to protect their proprietary recipes. You can't really do that through trademark law or copyright law or patent law, anything like that. You have to do it through trade secrets law, which means treat it as confidential information, only allow certain people to have access to that information, subject those people to confidentiality requirements so they can't tell anybody else, and don't let that information be disseminated. Then if somebody does get access to it and use it, like maybe you have a disgruntled employee who runs off and starts his own brewery and starts using your recipes, then you can sue that person for for trade secret violations, prevent them from using that information. You've thereby protected your recipes. Inventions aren't often a big deal in the beer industry unless you're talking about like hop strains or something like that. But if you come up with some really cool hop back technology or something like that, you can get that patented.
Dogfish Head has that weird.
The Randall?
The Randall.
Yeah. Do they have a patent on that?
Yeah, it's trademarked.
Oh,
the name
okay.
is trademarked.
Okay, yeah. I wonder if they try to get a patent on that thing. It's kind of cool. It's basically a pool filter, though. Packaging, you can also get, like if you have a unique bottle shape or a unique method of packaging your beer, you can sometimes get that protected under trade dress laws. But it's pretty tough to have something unique enough to be able to protect it. Alternative arrangements, contract brewing and alternative proprietorships. Again, we hit this in 404 much more extensively. The definition of contract brewing is a business relationship in which one person, such as a wholesaler, retail dealer, or brewer, pays a brewing company, the contract brewer, to produce beer for him or her, whereas an alternating proprietorship, or we call an old prop, is two or more people take turns using the physical premises of a brewery. The key difference here is contract brewing, you're paying somebody else to make beer for you. They buy the ingredients, they make the beer, they get the COLA they get the certificate of label approval for the product, they pay the taxes, they do everything, and you don't own the beer until it leaves their dock, basically. And then then it's yours and you can distribute it or whatever you're going to do with it. Alternating proprietorships, on the other hand, you are the brewer, it's under your license, you're paying the taxes, you're buying the ingredients. You're basically just sharing a space with another, a space and often equipment with another operation. Frankly, I don't know why more people don't do alternating proprietorships. I think they're great. That way, maybe you have a space that has a 10-barrel brew house, and then you each have 4 fermenters. Yeah, one guy has 4 fermenters, another guy has 4 fermenters. You take turns using the kettle, put the beer in your own fermenters. You can often share a tap room. It can become complicated, but you can share a tap room. A lot of efficiencies there that I think more people should probably take advantage of. Other legal issues we're going to hit in later classes. We'll talk about real estate, licensing, liability protection, which we hit on some here, insurance, financing, employment, and distribution. There's my contact issue, and we have about 1 minute. I don't know if we have any pressing questions up here that I can hit. But let's see.
Are dead trademarks available?
They are, yeah. Once a trademark has died or has been revoked for any reason, it's available for the taking.
I think that answers Jonathan's question.
Yeah, abandoned trademarks, same thing.
Can local landmarks or the likenesses of them be trademarked and famous figures? Or dead famous figures? I kind of put that in there.
Yeah. Yeah, you had to put that in there because I don't know that one.
Oh, sorry. What about local landmarks?
Local landmarks, they can't, like natural landmarks can't really be trademarked. You could get, like, if you have a particular photo or picture or something, like, a good example might be Deschutes Brewing. If you've ever seen their Mirror Pond label, it has a picture of Mirror Pond on the front. Well, it's a local landmark to Bend, Oregon. That actual location you can't get protection on, but you can get protection on the image. And the name Mirror Pond, you can get protection on as far as using it for a beer name. Even though it is a geographical location. And say you're going to name your brewery after the city that you're in, Portland Brewing Company. That gets in a little bit more of a deeper issue of whether the trademark itself is too descriptive to be protected. And I don't have any time, but just in a very quick nutshell, there are different levels of protection under trademarks. The more unique and distinctive a trademark is, the more protectable it is. The less distinctive and the more generic or descriptive that name is, the less protectable it's going to be. So if you want a really solid, protectable name, come up with something that nobody's used before. That's going to get you that highest amount of protection, plus the chances are just so much higher that nobody else has tried to use it. So that's...
They're saying you're all the same as co-paying.
Yeah, that's contract brewing. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's the business to be in today. If you want to build a big contract brewery, you will have people running all over you. Everyone that's built one recently is just filled right away with contracts.
Yeah.
I have people here in Portland looking to contract brew. They can't find any place that will take them.
Yeah.
So
I'm going to answer one more quick question.
Okay.
It's historic building question, just because I think it's so interesting. Sometimes historic buildings are protected by copyright because they are because the architect got some kind of protection on that building. The example I like to use is a brewery here used the statue of Portlandia in downtown Portland on one of its labels. And Portlandia is this giant statue downtown Portland. It's featured, you can see it on like the Portlandia TV show. They got a cease and desist because they were using a copyrighted image, and they were asked to remove that image from a label that they printed a lot of labels of. And they ended up, I think, settling and paying a licensing fee for it. But that just shows that historic buildings, statues, works of art, those things can be protectable, so you have to be careful of that.
yeah, we've gone over a few minutes. Thanks everybody for showing up. Thank you, Marcus, again.
Always a pleasure.
Love having you here. And you'll see him again in the beginning of 402. And for those of you rolling into 404, he's on a lot of those. Half of the content is you.
That's right. Yep.
Half the content is our content. Great having you all here. And we'll see you in a few weeks. And keep up on the modules. There's a ton of content, as you probably have seen.
And if anybody's going to be down in Dallas on the 12th, drop me an email. We'll have a keg of, what are we getting? Sculpin IPA. Delicious.
Yeah, what's the event?
We're hosting a tailgater.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Tailgater.
Yeah.
Okay.
Big tailgater. Ducks and Buckeyes welcome.
Lakewood Brewing while you're down there. There you go.
I'll definitely do that. I haven't done my research on
Oh,
it.
Dave says he lives there. Where's the tailgate?
It's going to be at Lot C of Ranger Stadium.
You can see his contact info here.
Yeah,
So
drop me an email.
there you go. All right, signing off, you guys. Take care.
Cheers.
Do send some Ballast Point down to Rio, please. Thanks for joining us, Walter, bright and early in your morning. Bye.
Bye-bye.